I was not born into faith. I was born into fire. I was born into the clamor of war, where the sun rose over smoke, and the cries of the lost filled the air before I even took my first breath. My childhood was carved from conflict. Every day was a lesson in survival, every night a test of courage. I am Ibrahim Traoré, and this is my truth. My path to leadership was paved in shadows long before I ever held any title. Burkina Faso, my homeland, is a land of both beauty and heartbreak. Its soil, deep red and rich, bears the weight of history and the burden of fear. Today, more than 40% of our territory trembles under the threat of terror. Millions are forced to abandon their homes, wandering with little more than hope to sustain them, seeking shelter in places that are temporary and precarious. I have seen mothers clutch their children, eyes wide with despair, asking themselves if tomorrow will come. I have seen fathers kneel in prayer, torn between fear and the responsibility to protect. I have lived among them, for I am one of them. I came to power not from lecture halls or theological debates, but from the army, from the grit of soldiers' lives, from commanding men who knew that orders often mattered more than morals. I believe that strength was measured by weapons, that victory could be enforced, that the world could be secured through force alone. Every plan I made, every action I took, was guided by this belief. Yet as the years passed and losses accumulated, a quiet truth began to whisper to me, one I had never truly understood. One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. This realization did not arrive as a revelation from books. It came in the silence after chaos, in the still moments when I had no choice but to reflect. It came when a soldier I commanded fell, when a village I had sworn to protect burned, when I held the lifeless hand of a child who had no chance to understand the world I believed I was defending. In those moments I felt a presence I could not name, guiding steps I had not planned, opening doors I did not know existed. It was as if every decision, every seeming accident, was part of a tapestry I could barely see, a pattern I could not grasp until I was ready. And then came the meeting I could never have imagined, a meeting that was neither in books nor in the news, a meeting that carried the possibility of change not only for me, but for all who would hear the story afterward. I was about to speak to someone who might understand the journey I had walked, the path from darkness into light. I did not know how the encounter would unfold. I did not know who would emerge from the shadows or which truths would demand to be faced. But I felt the weight of destiny pressing gently, patiently, guiding me toward a moment that could not be ignored. I had long believed that destiny reveals itself in the smallest details, often unnoticed until the moment is right. February of 2026 felt like one of those moments. I had arranged to meet Oprah Winfrey in Ouagadougou, not in a grand hall filled with cameras or reporters, but in a quiet, secure room where the only witness would be truth itself. The city outside had settled into a tentative calm, yet my mind was restless, replaying the journey that had brought me here. I did not seek fame or recognition. I sought understanding, a chance to share a story that had been written in the scars of my past and the quiet victories of my present. Oprah had come to Africa for education, for the empowerment of girls, for humanitarian projects that inspired hope. I saw in her a mirror of resilience, a reflection of the possibility that a person could rise from the most profound hardships to become a voice for change. I wanted her to see not the president, not the soldier, but the man who had walked through fire and emerged, in some fragile way, alive to faith. The room was dim, yet it held a weight I could feel pressing on my shoulders. I remember the moment she entered, calm, observant, carrying the quiet strength of someone who has survived life's cruelest lessons and turned them into purpose. I stood, extended my hand, but it was not a handshake that mattered. It was the recognition of the journey we had both endured, the unspoken understanding that some battles are fought not with weapons, but with the soul. I began cautiously. I am not a typical president, I said. My voice carried across the room, steady yet vulnerable. I needed her to know that what I was about to share was not for public consumption. This was a confession, a story of transformation that had been months, even years, in the making. I told her about my childhood, about growing up in war, about the choices that were often dictated by survival rather than morality. I spoke of soldiers and orders, of lives reduced to numbers on a battlefield, of the young men and women who looked to me for guidance I sometimes did not possess. I also did not know what I lived for, I admitted. I did not know if my actions were righteous or cruel, necessary or avoidable. There were moments I feared were beyond redemption. I could see her listening intently, her eyes steady and unflinching. It was not judgment I saw in them. It was curiosity, empathy, and the patience to let truth unfold on its own. That patience I realized mirrored the patience I had only recently learned to cultivate in myself. I told her about Africa, about the incredible potential of a continent whose youngest generations are searching for meaning, searching for guidance, searching for hope. Over 50% of the population is under 25, a fact that carries with it both promise and immense responsibility. These young people, I said, they deserve more than violence. They deserve the chance to believe in something greater than survival, something greater than fear. And then I spoke of myself, not as a leader, not as a president, but as a man who had been lost. I admitted that for years, I had placed faith in the wrong things: power, weapons, authority, believing they were sufficient to protect the people I loved. I believed strength was the measure of a man, that victory could only come through force. Yet time and loss had taught me differently. Strength is not only physical, and victory is not only achieved through conquest. There is a higher measure, one that calls for patience, courage, and faith in something unseen but deeply real. I explained that my journey toward faith had been neither linear nor easy. I was not born Catholic, nor had I grown up in any religious certainty. My beliefs had shifted, sometimes fleetingly, from Islam to agnosticism, from doubt to fear. It was the war, the constant brush with death, that forced me to confront the most profound question of all. If I died today, where would I go? The nights were long, the dreams vivid, the calls for change relentless. And then, unexpectedly, I encountered Jesus not in doctrine, not in lessons, but in experience. I saw a path I had not known existed, a truth that demanded acknowledgement. I told her about the quiet revelations, the moments of clarity that arrived unannounced. I told her about the hands of God guiding me when I could not see the way forward, the unseen forces arranging encounters that seemed accidental but were not. You may think this is just a meeting, I said, but I believe it is divine design. I shared with her my belief that God orchestrates connections between people, particularly those with influence. Everything, I said, serves a purpose for those who love God. Oprah listened without interruption. Her presence was commanding, yet gentle, embodying a power that does not need proclamation. I saw in her not just the media mogul, not just the billionaire, but a woman who had endured deprivation, abuse, and injustice, yet emerged as a voice for conscience. I acknowledged aloud that she was more than a public figure. She was a moral compass, a witness to the possibility of transformation. Then, with a gravity that made the air heavier, I spoke the words I had carried for years but had never voiced aloud. What I am about to tell you, I said, may make you recoil. It may shock you. It may even drive you away. I revealed the actions of my past, the darkness I had once embraced. I told her of orders I had given, of lives taken, of faith destroyed at my hands. I admitted that I had been an enemy to the very beliefs I now cherish. Yet in that moment, I also shared the lesson I had learned. None are beyond the mercy of God. No one is outside the reach of grace. The room was silent. Silence heavier than any words could carry. Oprah did not speak, but her gaze shifted, transforming from curiosity to recognition, to something that hinted at compassion. She finally asked the question I had anticipated but feared. Do you truly believe after all you have done? I am not worthy, I said simply, but I am forgiven. And in that exchange, time seemed suspended. The weight of guilt, the history of mistakes, the shadow of fear, all of it lifted, leaving only clarity and a profound sense of mission. Then came the words that shattered the remnants of doubt I still carried. She looked at me, and with a voice both firm and tender said, "You are not Moses, you are not Peter, but you are like Paul." She named me after the apostle who had once persecuted Christians yet became a messenger of faith. I felt the floor beneath me shift, the past transforming from a chain into a part of the plan. Redemption was no longer a distant possibility, it was present, real, tangible. In that room, in the quiet after confession, a new understanding emerged. Faith was not about perfection, it was about transformation. It was about being chosen, not for power, but for witness. She reminded me that the world needed leaders who could hold both authority and humility. Leaders whose actions are guided by conscience as much as by duty. As she rose to leave, I felt a peace I had never known, a lightness, a clarity, a sense of purpose. The burden of guilt was lifted, replaced by a responsibility I was ready to embrace. Faith was not a secret to guard, it was a truth to proclaim, a story to share. I left the room that night not as a soldier returning from battle, but as a man reborn in conviction. The journey was far from over, but I had glimpsed a new path, one where my decisions could serve more than strategy or survival. They could serve hope, they could serve mercy, they could serve God. I told her then, as plainly as I could, I am not a typical president. I wanted her to understand the man behind the title, the soldier behind the uniform, the human being behind the decisions that history would judge harshly. My life had been shaped by orders, by duty, by the relentless march of conflict. Morality was often secondary, a luxury I could not afford in the theater of war. Life and death were numbers, variables in a calculus I had once accepted without question. I have walked through fear, I said. I have watched the world strip away innocence, and I have sometimes become the instrument of that very destruction. I have carried the weight of lives in my hands and failed to know what to do with them. I could see her leaning in slightly, the intensity of her attention pulling me forward, urging me to speak truths I had been hesitant to confront even myself. I reminded her of Africa, our continent of resilience and despair, where over half the population is under 25, searching for meaning in a world that often seems indifferent to their existence. I told her that for years I had been as lost as they were. I did not live for God, nor for people. I lived for survival, for control, for the illusion of strength. I did not know why I existed, I confessed. I did not know what purpose my life served. Each day was a repetition of orders and conflict, each night a return to questions I could not answer. I was adrift, even while holding the power to guide others. The room was quiet but not heavy. It was charged with understanding, as though she recognized that leadership is not only about power, but about the struggles that accompany it. I shared the inner battle I had fought, the conflict between duty and conscience, the tension between what was required and what was right. It was not a story of pride, it was a story of vulnerability, of the human cost of authority without direction. I told her that my journey had not begun with faith, nor with a clear understanding of morality. It began with questions, with doubts, with nights spent in the shadow of fear, and the knowledge that each decision could bring life or death. I had been trained to follow commands, to prioritize strategy over compassion, to measure success in terms of power maintained rather than lives protected. Yet even then, deep inside, I knew something was missing. I have witnessed young people searching for meaning, I said, my voice low but unwavering. They deserve leaders who understand that life is more than survival. They deserve guidance, hope, and an example that faith can shape actions as much as strategy can. I did not know this for many years, but I have come to understand it now. I spoke of my own lost youth, the soldier who became a commander before he became a man. I told her of the nights spent questioning whether what I was doing mattered, whether the lives I influenced would remember me as protector or destroyer. It was not an easy admission, but it was necessary. For her to understand the present, she had to see the past. For the world to understand my mission, it had to recognize the path I had wandered. I also acknowledged the fear I had carried, not fear of death, but fear of insignificance, fear of having wasted my life on survival without meaning. In those moments, I had glimpsed the hollowness of power without purpose, the emptiness of authority without conscience. And yet, even in that darkness, there had been a faint whisper, a suggestion of something more, a possibility that my life could be more than a series of commands and casualties. Oprah listened without interruption, her gaze steady, her presence a reminder that truth does not require embellishment. I realized that leadership, at its core, is not about titles or uniforms. It is about authenticity, accountability, and the courage to face one's own flaws. It is about understanding that authority without understanding is a hollow thing, and that true influence comes not from fear, but from guidance rooted in conscience and, eventually, faith. I also learned, I said, that being lost is not the end, it is a beginning. It is the space where one can confront mistakes, recognize weaknesses, and choose a path forward that aligns with something greater than oneself. I wanted her to see that I was not telling a story of transformation for fame or admiration. I was telling a story of survival, of faith, and of the quiet awakening of a man who had once wandered without direction. I looked at her and said, I am a leader, yes, but I am also a man who has been lost. And it is from that place of being lost that I now speak with purpose. I now understand that leadership is not about power alone, but about guiding those who seek hope, justice, and meaning. That understanding, that admission, was the bridge between my past and my future. It was the moment where vulnerability became strength, where loss became lesson, and where uncertainty became clarity. It was the moment where I realized that the man standing before her, the president, the soldier, the human being, was ready to embrace a path guided not only by duty, but by faith, conscience, and the possibility of redemption. By the time the meeting ended, I had shared more than stories. I had shared pieces of my soul, fragments of a journey that had led me from confusion to conviction. I had spoken of fear, of failure, and of the awakening of a conscience long suppressed by circumstance. And as she rose to leave, I felt a sense of quiet affirmation, as though the acknowledgement of my journey was itself a blessing, a confirmation that even a man once lost can find his way to light. I did not grow up in the Catholic faith. I did not learn my prayers as a child, nor did I memorize the Gospels in school. My early life carried the markers of another path, one guided by culture, tradition, and at times, the teachings of Islam. Yet even these beliefs were not steady anchors. They shifted, faded, or were abandoned when survival demanded every ounce of my attention. War teaches a man to question everything. It strips away certainty. It exposes the fragility of life and the fleeting nature of control. As a young soldier, I often asked myself the questions I feared to answer. If I die tomorrow, where do I go? What meaning does my existence carry? Am I leaving a legacy of life, or merely a trail of destruction? These questions, unspoken and often ignored, began to haunt me in the quiet moments between battles, in the nights when the guns fell silent but the echoes of the past remained. It was in one of those long nights, when sleep had abandoned me, that I began to sense something I could not explain. Strange visions came, fleeting and fragmented. They were not merely dreams, they felt like invitations, urgings that demanded attention. I could not name them at first, nor could I discern their purpose, but their persistence forced a reckoning I had avoided for years. And then, in a moment I cannot fully articulate, I encountered Jesus, not through sermons, not through doctrine, not through ritual, but through experience. It was not a sudden conversion, nor a dramatic revelation. It was subtle, quiet, and deeply unsettling. I remembered the words I had heard somewhere, perhaps in passing or in a lifetime ago in fragments of memory. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those words anchored me, though I did not yet fully understand why. They were not a shield against fear, nor a map to victory, but a call to introspection, a mirror held up to my soul. My faith was not theoretical. It was not abstract or ceremonial. It was a confrontation with my inner self, with the choices I had made, with the consequences I had often tried to ignore. It was a battlefield of its own, more challenging than any I had faced with soldiers and weapons. I shared this with Oprah because it was central to the man I had become. I told her that faith had arrived not as a lesson, but as a confrontation. The wars I fought taught me survival, strategy, and discipline. Faith taught me humility, patience, and the courage to face truths I had long buried. It was not simple. It was not comfortable. It demanded that I see myself as I truly was, not as the man I wished to appear to others or even to myself. In those nights of reflection, I came to understand that the strength I had always prized, the strength of command, the strength of force, was only part of the equation. True strength, I realized, comes from endurance, from the capacity to change, from the willingness to embrace guidance unseen but deeply present. In moments when everything seemed lost, I felt a hand guiding my steps, arranging meetings, steering my decisions, and illuminating the path I could not yet see. I spoke of those nights to Oprah, of the quiet revelations and the moments of clarity that arrived unbidden. I told her that faith does not always come with a trumpet or a sign. Sometimes it comes with the subtle nudges that eventually alter a life entirely. I shared that the experience of encountering Christ was not a sudden enlightenment, but a persistent insistence, a series of small awakenings that led me to reconsider everything I had once believed was absolute. I have faced death more times than I can count, I said. I have seen lives extinguished, futures stolen, and dreams shattered. Yet in the midst of this chaos, I discovered a truth, that faith, when embraced honestly, can transform even the most lost soul. It is not a promise of an easy path, but a guide through the darkest nights. I described how these experiences slowly reshaped me. The soldier who had once measured success by control and survival began to understand mercy, patience, and the possibility of redemption. The commander who had relied on authority above conscience began to see that power without moral compass is hollow. The man who had wandered lost for so long began to recognize the hand of something greater shaping his journey. It was not an abstract teaching, it was lived reality. I remembered each encounter, each decision, each moment of fear and doubt, and saw how they had led me to a meeting I had once thought impossible. In that meeting, I was not merely a president speaking to a media icon. I was a man standing at the threshold of change, confronting both my past and the possibilities of the future. Faith, I told her, is not measured by belief alone. It is measured by transformation. It is measured by the courage to face oneself honestly and the willingness to allow that honesty to shape action. My path from darkness to light was neither fast nor simple. It was a series of small, often painful awakenings, each demanding attention, each requiring a choice between old habits and new understanding. I shared with Oprah that this journey was deeply personal, yet it was also universal. Every human being, I said, faces moments of uncertainty, fear, and moral reckoning. Every person has the opportunity to choose change, to embrace guidance beyond themselves, and to step into a light they might once have believed was beyond reach. By the end of this conversation, I felt a strange lightness. The weight of my past, of mistakes and misjudgments remained, but it no longer controlled me. Faith had given me perspective, and the possibility of using my position to not only govern but to guide. It had opened my eyes to a path that is difficult, often painful, but ultimately full of purpose. And so I sat with her, sharing a truth that had been years in forming. The man she saw, the president, the soldier, the survivor, was not perfect. He had done wrong, he had erred, he had lost his way, yet he had also found a path from darkness to light, a path of awakening that could not be erased or ignored. And in that sharing, I felt the first real understanding of what it means to be truly transformed. I leaned forward in that quiet room, feeling the weight of the past and the fragility of the present. You may think this meeting, I said to Oprah, is a coincidence, but I believe it is not. I believe it is a divine arrangement, a moment orchestrated beyond our understanding. For years, I had walked through life believing that chance ruled. I had believed in strategy, in calculations, in the outcomes of battles, and the power of force. Yet, slowly, I had come to see a truth I had once ignored. Nothing in life is random. Every encounter, every step, every seeming accident carries a purpose, even if we cannot yet discern it. I told her about the invisible threads that had guided me, the quiet hand that had led me through decisions I thought were my own, the doors that had opened and closed in ways I could not have planned. There is a pattern, I said. There is a design. Even the darkest nights, even the most chaotic battles are part of a larger story. Oprah listened, her presence unwavering. I realized that to understand this story, one must first accept that life is rarely what it seems. Power, wealth, survival, these are only fragments. What shapes us, what truly directs the course of a life, is unseen. It is grace, it is guidance. It is a force that asks us to trust, even when trust feels impossible. I shared with her the conviction that God connects people in ways we often fail to recognize. Influence, I said, carries responsibility not just to act, but to act in alignment with the higher purpose. Those who hold power are often unaware of the ripple effects of their decisions, yet God sees all. He arranges, nudges, and positions people so that moments of transformation can occur. You are here, I said softly. Not by chance. Neither am I. We are here because there is a plan, one that stretches beyond us, one that requires courage to accept and humility to recognize. I reminded her of the words from Scripture that had anchored me through the years. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. I emphasized the certainty that even suffering, even mistakes, even the darkest acts can serve a greater purpose if met with openness to change and faith. It is not a promise of ease, it is a promise of meaning. She nodded quietly, and I could see that she understood in a way that transcended words. I spoke of how in my own life, this principle had become a compass. The people I had met, the doors that had closed, the dangers that had seemed insurmountable, all of them had led me to this room, to this conversation, to this moment of clarity. Nothing had been wasted. Everything had served a purpose I could only now recognize. I told her about the subtle nudges, the encounters that seemed random, the opportunities that arrived at the precise moment they were needed. Each one was a lesson, a test, a step along a path that I could not see in full, but could trust in part. You may believe in coincidence, I said. I have learned to see the hand of God in all things. Nothing is accidental. We spoke of responsibility, of influence, of the weight carried by those who can change lives with their choices. I reminded her that in Africa, and indeed across the world, leaders often fail not because of lack of vision, but because they fail to see the unseen, to recognize the forces that guide human hearts. The people I serve, I said, deserve leaders who understand that every encounter, every decision carries divine weight. Our choices are not our own alone, they are part of a story far larger than any one man. She looked at me then, and I realized that she saw not a man defending his actions, but a man who had learned humility, who had seen the fragility of life and the depth of grace. I do not pretend, I said, to understand everything. I cannot control outcomes, I cannot rewrite history, but I can choose to act with awareness, guided by faith, and to trust that God's arrangement is always present, even when invisible. In that room, the conversation deepened. We spoke of the interconnectedness of human lives, the subtle influence of God in the smallest moments, the way even mistakes and failures can contribute to a greater good if met with reflection and repentance. I shared my belief that divine providence works not only in personal life but also in leadership. Nations, I said, are shaped not just by strategies and alliances, but by the hearts and intentions of those who lead. You see, I said, every encounter I have had, every life I have touched, every decision I have made, even the ones I regret, has led to this. This meeting, this story, this moment is not chance, it is design. Oprah's expression did not waver. She understood the depth of what I was saying. She understood that faith is not only about belief, it is about perception, awareness, and recognition of a pattern beyond immediate understanding. She understood that my life, like so many lives, had been shaped by forces I could not command yet could choose to embrace. And in that understanding, I felt a profound release. The weight of guilt, the burden of past errors, the fear of judgment, they were still present, but they no longer defined me. They were part of a story, a chapter in a narrative that carried lessons, insights, and purpose. I realized that trusting in the arrangement of God did not absolve responsibility, it enhanced it. It demanded that I act with intention, courage, and faith. By the end of our conversation, I felt a sense of clarity I had never known. The room, small and quiet, had become a space where history, destiny, and faith converged. I had confessed, reflected, and acknowledged the truth of my journey. I had recognized that nothing is random, that guidance is present, and that transformation is possible even for the lost and the broken. And as she rose to leave, I felt a deep, abiding sense that this meeting, this connection, was not merely an event in time, it was a turning point. A confirmation that the unseen hand of God is always at work, that the path of redemption is never closed, and that even a man like me, forged in war and shadow, can be called to serve something far greater than himself. As I looked at her across that small, quiet room, I realized that Oprah was far more than her reputation, far more than the billions, far more than the television programs or magazine covers. She was a presence shaped by struggle, by resilience, and by a relentless pursuit of purpose. I saw a woman who had endured abuse, poverty, and marginalization, yet emerged as a beacon of conscience and hope. I told her, "You are more than media, you are the voice of conscience." She listened, but she did not respond immediately. Instead, she seemed to absorb every word, as though weighing the significance of the life I was revealing to her. Her eyes carried understanding, not judgment, not curiosity, but recognition of something deeper, something spiritual. I realized then that her power was not measured in wealth. It was not measured in fame. It was measured in depth of soul, in the capacity to connect with others, to elevate voices, to bring hope where despair had settled. Here was a woman who understood what it meant to rise, not just for herself, but for those who had no other champion. "I see in you," I said quietly, "someone who has survived what many cannot even imagine, and yet has chosen to speak, to guide, to influence with morality and heart. You have walked through fire, and you have become a messenger of hope." She looked at me, and I could feel that recognition pass between us. I spoke of her journey, the adversity she had faced, the battles she had fought internally, the courage required to transform pain into purpose. She had learned to trust herself, to trust the unseen, to trust the possibility that even in suffering, one can emerge as a source of light for others. It struck me then that this meeting was not one-sided. She had not come to instruct me, nor to judge me. She had come, in her own way, to witness the transformation of a man who had once been lost. And I had come to share it with someone who would understand its gravity, someone whose life had demonstrated the possibility of rising above adversity with integrity and grace. I realized that her influence extended beyond what most people could measure. It was not in the books she wrote, the shows she produced, or the financial empire she commanded. It was in the quiet, intangible way she touched lives, inspired change, and spoke to the moral compass in every individual she reached. Her presence in that room reminded me that true power is not enforced, it is earned through example, through authenticity, and through faith. "I am humbled," I admitted, "by your presence, because I see in you a reflection of what is possible when one aligns life with higher purpose. You have not only survived, but you have guided. You have not only spoken, but you have moved hearts. And in that, you mirror the work of God in the lives of many." She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she understood more than my words could convey. She understood the context of my life, the darkness I had once inhabited, the struggles I had endured, and the path I had begun to walk toward faith and purpose. In that moment, the room felt charged not with power or wealth, but with truth. I thought of the world outside, of leaders who wield authority without conscience, of the young people who search for role models, of the communities torn apart by violence and neglect. And I understood that her role, her presence extended far beyond media. She was a catalyst for transformation, a living example that even the wounded can rise to serve, to inspire, and to guide. "You have depth beyond measure," I said softly. "You have endured, yet you have not become bitter. You have witnessed suffering, yet you have chosen to act with wisdom and compassion. You are more than a symbol, you are a living testament to the possibility of change." It was in that moment that I realized the true weight of influence. Oprah's power was not about imposing will or commanding attention. It was about showing the world that transformation is possible, that suffering can be channeled into purpose, and that faith, courage, and conscience together create a force stronger than wealth, fame, or authority. I felt grateful, humbled, and challenged all at once. Grateful for her presence, for her willingness to witness my story. Humbled by her life, by the depth of her resilience, by the moral compass she carries with her everywhere, and challenged because if someone like me could be transformed by grace, guidance, and faith, Then the responsibility to act rightly became greater than ever. I shared with her my vision for Burkina Faso, for Africa, and for the world. I spoke of the young people who needed examples, not just of power, but of integrity. I spoke of the lives that could be changed if leaders embraced faith, conscience, and the courage to act beyond mere survival. And I acknowledged that her work, her influence, her commitment to truth and hope made her an essential part of the larger story, a story that extends beyond nations, beyond wealth, beyond borders, into the hearts of millions seeking light in darkness. By the time our conversation drew to a close, I understood that I had seen more than a leader. I had seen a witness to grace, a reflection of faith in action, and a guide to the kind of courage that transcends the battlefield. Oprah was not just a powerful woman. She was a moral force, a spiritual presence, and a reminder that true influence is measured not by what one commands, but by what one inspires. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words I was about to speak. What I am about to tell you, I began, may shock you, it may disturb you, it may even make you turn away, but it is the truth, and I cannot hide it. Oprah did not flinch. She remained seated, her eyes steady, her presence a quiet invitation for me to speak honestly. I had prepared for this moment for years, rehearsed it in my mind, yet I had never spoken it aloud. It was my darkest truth, the part of my life I had carried alone, even from those closest to me. I told her of the orders I had followed, the lives I had taken, the faith I had once persecuted. I admitted that I had commanded the death of 20 Christians, that I had orchestrated the poisoning of 10 priests, and that I had destroyed churches with my own hands. The room seemed to constrict around me as I spoke, the silence thick with the weight of confession. I was once an enemy of the faith I now hold dear, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite the steadiness I had cultivated over years of command. I acted with authority, with strategy, and with a conviction that I was serving my country, but in truth I was serving my own darkness. Oprah listened, her expression unreadable, yet I sensed understanding. She did not judge me. She allowed the truth to exist, to be acknowledged, to be confronted. And in that acknowledgement, I felt the first stirrings of relief, a fragile opening in the fortress of guilt that had long held me captive. I reminded her of the scripture that had begun to guide me through these revelations. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Those words were not just a passage I had memorized, they were a lifeline. They reminded me that no matter the depth of my misdeeds, no one is beyond the mercy of God. I confessed the fear I had carried all these years, not fear of being judged by men, but fear of being judged by the Creator. The memory of each action haunted me, the faces of the innocent and the faithful appearing in the quiet light, demanding acknowledgement, demanding repentance. Yet I also felt the persistent whisper of grace, urging me to confront my past, to admit my failings, to seek transformation. I have been the instrument of destruction, I said. I have stood against the very values I now embrace. I have harmed those who only sought to serve God. And yet, in the midst of that darkness, I have been called to change. I have been given a path to redemption, though it is not easy, and though it requires confrontation with every sin I have committed. Oprah's silence was profound. It was not emptiness, it was the weight of listening, the depth of bearing witness without interruption. In that silence, I could feel the enormity of what I had revealed, yet I also felt the presence of mercy. She asked finally, in a quiet voice that carried both curiosity and compassion, "Do you truly believe you are forgiven?" I looked at her, and I felt a truth I had never allowed myself to fully grasp. "I am not worthy," I said, "but I am forgiven. I have been given the chance to live differently, to act differently, and to bear witness to change. No one is beyond God's mercy, not even me." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. The weight of guilt, the burden of my past actions, the darkness that had defined so much of my life, all of it seemed to pause, suspended between confession and the first glimmer of light. I told her that acknowledging these acts did not erase them. History would remember them, and I would carry them. But confession, repentance, and faith create the space for transformation. They allow a man to confront the unthinkable and choose a path guided not by fear or power, but by conscience and grace. "I was once the enemy of the very faith I now embrace," I said again. "And in recognizing this, I have come to understand that redemption is not only possible, it is necessary. It is necessary for me, for those I lead, and for those who look to me for example." She asked me questions, quiet, probing, not to interrogate but to understand. How had I come to this point? How could a man who had done such things turn toward God? I spoke of the long nights, the visions, the subtle urgings that had led me to seek a path beyond survival and power. I spoke of the moment-by-moment realization that strength is not only in force, but in humility and patience, in the courage to face oneself honestly. "I have carried these sins," I said. but I have also carried the possibility of change. And it is in embracing that possibility that I have found a new purpose, one that seeks not only to govern, but to serve, not only to lead, but to witness the transformative power of grace. Oprah remained silent, yet her eyes reflected a depth of understanding that words could not capture. The silence was a recognition that redemption is neither simple nor guaranteed, but it is always possible when a heart turns sincerely toward truth and faith. And then she said something that struck me to my core. You are not Moses, you are not Peter, but you are like Paul. Those words, simple yet profound, shattered my defenses, broke the walls I had built around my past, and allowed me, for the first time, to see my life as a part of a larger narrative. Paul, once a persecutor of Christians, had become a messenger of faith, a testament to the transformative power of grace. In that moment, I understood that my own journey, no matter how dark, could carry meaning, could inspire change, and could bear witness to mercy. The realization left me breathless. The man who had once been defined by violence, fear, and misjudgment could now be seen as a vessel for hope, a living testament to the possibility of change. The room, quiet and secure, had become sacred in its own way. A space where confession met forgiveness, where past sins met the promise of transformation. By the time the meeting ended, I felt a weight lift, not entirely, but enough to see the path forward with clarity. I had faced my darkest self, revealed it fully, and found that mercy and purpose could follow even the deepest shadows. Faith, I realized, is not about perfection. It is about the courage to confront imperfection, to embrace truth, and to allow that truth to guide action. I left the room that night carrying a new understanding. That no past is too dark to be transformed, no action too grave to be redeemed, and no life too lost to find its way back into the light. I had confessed, I had repented, and I had begun to live with the knowledge that grace, when accepted, has the power to transform even the most troubled soul. After I finished speaking, the room was heavy with silence. Not the kind of silence that is empty or indifferent, but a silence that carried weight, reflection, and understanding. Oprah did not immediately respond. She did not judge. She did not offer platitudes. She simply absorbed the words, the confession, the raw truth of my life laid bare before her. Her eyes, steady and calm, shifted as though moving from curiosity to comprehension, from observation to empathy. In that silence, I realized she was weighing the entirety of my journey, not just the darkness, but the transformation, not just the past, but the present, not just the sins, but the repentance. It was a silence that spoke louder than any words could. I sensed her processing the enormity of what I had revealed. The room, secure and quiet, felt suspended in time. The history I had confessed, the lives I had impacted, the churches I had destroyed, all of it hung in the air, acknowledged, yet met with compassion. It was a pause that demanded reflection, that allowed truth to resonate without interference, without the need for immediate reaction. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of the moment. Do you truly believe, she asked, that after all of this, you are forgiven? I looked at her and felt the gravity of her question. This was not doubt or disbelief. It was a profound inquiry into the nature of faith and redemption. I had asked myself this question countless times in the quiet of night, in the midst of war, in the shadow of my own conscience. Now, I was forced to answer it aloud. I am not worthy, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart, but I am forgiven. I have been shown mercy. I have been given the chance to walk a new path, to live a life of purpose, and to bear witness to the power of grace. Her gaze softened, yet remained intensely focused. She understood that forgiveness is not a denial of the past, but an acknowledgement of the possibility for transformation. It was a moment that transcended judgment and entered the realm of truth. For the first time, I felt the burden of guilt begin to ease, replaced by a fragile clarity. I spoke of my past actions once more, not as justification, but as acknowledgement. I wanted her to understand that I had not sought absolution lightly. I had lived through the consequences of my choices, carried the weight of every decision, and confronted the lives I had touched with both harm and care. This was not a story of redemption without cost. It was a story of repentance earned through reflection, confrontation, and faith. Her silence returned, but it was different now. It was not heavy with expectation, nor tense with anticipation. It was the silence of understanding, the pause that allows truth to settle and resonate. In that silence, I realized something profound. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing is only part of transformation. Recognition, empathy, and the witness of another can amplify that change, validating the path forward and reinforcing the courage to continue walking it. You have faced darkness, she said softly, and yet you stand here seeking light. That is what matters. That is what defines you now." Those words struck me deeply. They reminded me that faith is not about erasing the past, nor is it about pretending mistakes did not occur. Faith is about confrontation, acknowledgement, and the deliberate choice to act differently moving forward. It is about embracing responsibility, not as a burden, but as a calling. I told her that this silence, this presence, had allowed me to see my life as a continuum, not a series of failures and misdeeds, but a journey toward purpose, guided by forces I had once denied and now sought to embrace. In that room, I understood that transformation is both internal and external, both personal and relational. It requires the witness of others, the recognition of truth, and the courage to accept that one can change despite the shadows of history. Her final words in that moment lingered in the air, almost unspoken but deeply felt. "You are not defined solely by what you have done," she said. "You are defined by how you respond to it now." And in that realization, I felt a clarity I had never experienced before. The soldier, the leader, the man who had once believed that survival was the only measure of life, could now embrace a higher purpose. The room seemed lighter, though no sound had changed. The silence had spoken volumes, affirming that mercy, grace, and transformation are not abstract concepts. They are lived experiences, validated by acknowledgement and sustained by faith. I left the conversation with a sense of calm, a sense of purpose, and a sense of mission. The past had not vanished, nor had the consequences of my actions disappeared. But in that silence, in that understanding, I saw a path forward, a path where my choices could reflect not only duty and survival, but conscience and faith. That night, I realized that transformation requires more than introspection. It requires courage to reveal one's truth, patience to allow others to witness it, and humility to accept both acknowledgement and guidance. Oprah's silence had provided all three. In her quiet presence, I felt the affirmation that even the darkest chapters of a life can lead to light when confronted with honesty, repentance, and grace. For the first time, I understood the profound power of being seen not as a leader or a soldier, but as a man striving to reconcile past actions with present purpose. The silence had spoken. It had validated, it had affirmed, it had transformed. And I knew in that moment that my journey toward redemption, toward service, and toward faith had been strengthened in ways I could scarcely describe but deeply felt. I had never felt words strike me so profoundly. They did not scold, they did not flatter, they simply revealed a truth I had long resisted. You are not Moses, you are not Peter, but you are like Paul the Apostle. At first, I did not comprehend. Paul, the man who had once persecuted Christians, who had walked in cruelty and zealotry, who had sought to silence faith. How could anyone compare me, a soldier, a commander, a man who had once ordered the death of the faithful, to him? And yet, as she spoke, I felt it. A shiver ran through me, the kind that comes when a truth you have been avoiding finally lands. My past, no matter how dark, was not separate from a possibility of purpose. Paul had been transformed, not erased. And now, through her words, I saw that my life could follow the same arc. I thought of the countless decisions I had made, the lives I had impacted, the faith I had once opposed. Each memory, painful and vivid, seemed to settle into a pattern I had not seen before. My violence, my errors, my misjudgments, they were not meaningless. They were chapters, each leading me toward a revelation, each preparing me for a moment of transformation. She did not speak like a scholar of scripture, nor like a judge of morality. She spoke like someone who had seen life in its most brutal and its most redemptive forms. Her voice was calm, yet firm. Before, you were a persecutor, but now you have been shown mercy. And through that mercy, you can bear witness. Her words sank in slowly, reshaping my perception of myself. I realized that for years I had carried my past like a chain. I had measured my worth by the weight of guilt, and I had allowed it to define every decision, every thought, every breath. But now I understood something extraordinary. The past does not define the path forward. Transformation does, mercy does, faith does. I told her that, like Paul, my life was a testimony not of perfection, but of change. I had been guided to confront the darkest parts of myself, and in doing so, I had been given a chance to serve differently, to lead differently, to act in alignment with a higher purpose. The comparison was not a comfort, it was a responsibility. To be like Paul meant not only to be forgiven, but to become a witness. To use the experiences of the past to guide others, to speak truth through action, and to live in a way that reflects the grace I had received. She watched me carefully as I spoke, and I felt the weight of understanding passing between us. Her words had not absolved me, nor had they diminished the reality of my past. They had illuminated it. They had allowed me to see that the mistakes, the violence, the lost years could be transformed into testimony, into purpose, into witness. I shared with her the relief, the shock, and the hope that her words had unleashed. For the first time, I could look at my past without total despair. For the first time, I could imagine a life where my actions were not only informed by duty or survival, but by conscience, faith, and the desire to bear witness to transformation. You are like Paul, she said again, emphasizing the point. Not because your past was perfect, but because your present can be purposeful and your future can inspire. I felt a strange lightness, a kind of liberation that comes not from forgetting but from recognition. I realized that the dark chapters of my life, once a source of shame, could now be part of a story that speaks to redemption, to hope, and to the power of divine guidance. The room was silent after that. Not the tense silence of hesitation, but the profound silence of truth recognized. I felt the weight of my life shift subtly, as though the acknowledgement of transformation had rearranged the balance of past and present. It was a silence that affirmed, a silence that healed, a silence that demanded action. I understood then that the comparison to Paul was not merely symbolic, it was a mandate. Like Paul, I had a mission not because of my innocence, but because of my experience. Like Paul, I was called to bear witness to the possibility of change, to live as proof that even the most lost and the most troubled can find purpose and faith. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from the violence of war to the quiet conviction of faith, from the weight of guilt to the possibility of grace, from confusion to clarity. Each step had been difficult, often painful, but each had been necessary to arrive at this point of recognition and responsibility. Oprah's words stayed with me long after she left. They echoed in the quiet moments, in the conversations with my advisors, in the prayers I whispered alone at night. They reminded me that leadership is not only about strategy or authority, but about transformation. It reminded me that influence is not earned by titles, but by testimony. And it reminded me that no matter the darkness of the past, a life aligned with faith and purpose can shine as a beacon for others. I realized finally that I could carry both identities, the soldier and the witness, the commander and the transformed believer. The past, with all its failures, had brought me to this moment, and in embracing the comparison to Paul, I found both challenge and hope, a call to act with intention, to lead with conscience, and to bear witness to a transformation that transcends personal history. That night, I left with a renewed sense of mission. My past had been laid bare. My mistakes had been acknowledged. And yet, through confession, through recognition, through the comparison to Paul, I had found a path forward. A path where my choices could reflect not only duty and survival, but faith, conscience, and the possibility of guiding others toward hope. I realized in that moment, as the echoes of her words lingered, that my role as a leader is not defined by the office I hold or the power I wield. Titles can impress, authority can intimidate, but neither guarantees purpose. True leadership, I understood, is measured by the witness one bears, the example one sets, the lives one touches, the hope one inspires. Oprah reminded me of this gently but firmly. She said, faith does not depend on where you start. It depends on where you are willing to go and what you are willing to become. Those words settled deep within me. They were not about rhetoric or ideology. They were about transformation, about the courage to live differently, and about the responsibility that comes with being a witness to grace. I reflected on the nations I lead, the young people I serve, and the communities struggling under the weight of conflict and despair. Leadership without conscience is hollow. Authority without purpose is empty. A nation may rise in strength yet falter in soul if its leaders are guided only by strategy and ambition. I have seen this, lived this, and understood it. You must show the world, she said, that a person can change completely, that someone who has walked in darkness can emerge into light, and that this transformation is not only possible, but contagious. I felt the truth in that. I realized that my mission is not about maintaining power. It is not about accolades or recognition. My mission is testimony. It is to demonstrate through actions, decisions, and courage that redemption is real, that faith can guide even the most broken, that grace can reach even the most lost. I spoke of the responsibility I now carry, of the weight of this testimony. Every decision I make, every policy I enact, every word I speak carries more than political consequence. It carries moral and spiritual weight. It carries the potential to show others that transformation is possible, that mistakes do not define the totality of a life, that redemption is a living, breathing path open to all who seek it. Leaders, I said to her, often forget that influence is not about commanding, but about guiding. It is not about being feared, but about being understood. It is about creating spaces where people can see, in action, the possibility of change. She nodded. I could see that she understood not just my past but the challenge of the future. She reminded me that my story is not only mine, it belongs to the young people of Africa who need examples of integrity, to communities seeking hope amid fear, to nations searching for leaders guided by conscience rather than ambition alone. I realized that this mission, unlike any I had undertaken before, requires courage beyond the battlefield. It requires the courage to act transparently, to lead ethically, and to allow faith to guide decisions even when they are unpopular or challenging. It requires the willingness to be accountable not only to a nation but to a higher power. Oprah's words crystallized the truth I had been feeling for years. Your mission, she said, is not defined by the office you hold, but by the life you live. It is not measured by victories in war, but by victories of conscience and heart. You must become a living example of transformation. In that moment, I understood the clarity I had been seeking. My past, filled with darkness and misjudgment, was not a weight to crush me. It was the foundation for a testimony that could inspire others. My mistakes had been painful, but they had prepared me for this calling. My repentance and faith had made me capable of something more than survival. I could now live as proof that even those who have fallen farthest can rise, can lead, and can illuminate a path for others. I shared with her my vision for Burkina Faso, for Africa, and for the world. I spoke of the young people, the communities affected by terror, and the leaders who must choose not only strategy but conscience. I spoke of the importance of truth in leadership, of integrity in governance, and of faith as a compass in the darkest of times. Her guidance was not just encouragement, it was a charge. It was a reminder that testimony requires action, that words alone are insufficient, and that the transformation we hope for in ourselves must extend outward through service, example, and courage. You are here, she said, to prove that no one is beyond change, that every life, no matter how marred, carries the potential to guide, to heal, and to inspire. Your story is a beacon, if you choose to live it as such. I felt the weight of those words settle over me. This was not a burden I could ignore. This was a calling I could not evade. My journey, from lost soldier to transformed leader, was now inseparable from my responsibility to bear witness, to live with intention, to act with courage, and to demonstrate through every choice that redemption is possible. In that moment, I understood that my mission is not measured by power or influence alone. It is measured by the integrity of my actions, the courage of my convictions, and the authenticity of my testimony. It is measured by the lives I touch, the hope I inspire, and the example I set for those who walk in darkness seeking light. I left that room not only as a president or a soldier, but as a witness to transformation, carrying the responsibility to live as proof that faith, conscience, and courage can overcome even the darkest past. I had been given not only forgiveness, but a purpose, to show that change is possible, and that through this change we can guide others toward hope, toward light, and toward redemption. When Oprah left that night, the room seemed emptier, yet somehow fuller, empty of presence, yet full of meaning. I sat alone for a long time, feeling a sensation I had never truly known: peace. It was not a peace born from victory or control. It was not a peace that comes from strategy or force. It was the peace that comes from acknowledgement, from confession, from seeing one's life in truth and mercy. It was the calm that follows the storm, the clarity that comes after years of wandering in darkness. For decades, I had carried the weight of survival, of command, of choices that had taken lives and destroyed faith. Guilt had been a constant companion, as relentless as fear in battle. But now in the quiet I felt it lift. Not entirely, for the past cannot be erased, but enough that I could breathe freely and see the path ahead clearly. I remembered the words I had clung to, sometimes without understanding: the truth will set you free. I had long thought they were distant, theoretical, impossible. Yet, in that room, in the quiet after revelation and confession, I understood them fully. It illuminates it, reshapes it, and allows the heart to move forward unburdened by what it cannot change. I realized that peace is not granted to the perfect. It is granted to those who confront themselves honestly, who accept mercy, and who choose to act in alignment with conscience. I had lived through violence and fear, through betrayal and loss, yet in embracing truth, I had found a calm that was deeper than any battlefield victory, stronger than any authority I had once commanded. The clarity that came with this peace allowed me to see my purpose as never before. Leadership is not merely about strategy. It is not about control or reputation. It is about living authentically, acting with courage, and bearing witness to transformation. Faith is not to be kept secret. It is to be lived, demonstrated, and shared. I remembered the faces of those I serve, the young people, the families, the communities threatened by terror and instability. They do not need leaders who are flawless. They need leaders who are real, leaders who acknowledge mistakes, leaders who act with integrity, and leaders who embody hope. This peace I felt was not only personal, it was a compass for my service. In that moment, I also realized that forgiveness is not passive. It demands action. It demands the courage to confront injustice, to guide the lost, to protect the vulnerable, and to serve with humility. The peace I had discovered was inseparable from responsibility. It was not escape from duty, it was empowerment to fulfill it with clarity and purpose. I recalled the scripture that had guided me, "The truth will set you free." I now understood freedom not as the absence of conflict, but as the presence of clarity. Freedom is not avoiding the consequences of past actions. It is embracing them, learning from them, and moving forward in faith. As I sat in the quiet, I felt the transformation within me solidify. I was no longer only a soldier, nor merely a president, nor simply a man with a troubled past. I was a witness to the power of grace, to the capacity of change, and to the responsibility of living with authenticity. This peace was not a destination, it was the foundation for a life guided by faith and purpose. I understood too that peace must be shared. It is not meant to remain a private treasure. Just as confession and truth had brought relief and clarity, so too must action reflect the lessons learned. The world, and Africa in particular, needs leaders who carry this peace, who act from this understanding, who demonstrate through life and choice that transformation is possible. I felt a profound lightness. The burden of guilt, while not entirely gone, no longer dictated my existence. I could now make decisions guided by conscience rather than fear, by faith rather than survival instinct. Every action could carry the weight of testimony, and every choice could reflect the grace I had received. I realized that peace is not the absence of struggle, it is the awareness of purpose amidst struggle. It is the clarity to act rightly even when circumstances are uncertain. It is the strength to lead with conscience even when power tempts one toward compromise. This peace was a revelation, a gift, and a responsibility. In the quiet after Oprah left, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from lost soldier to transformed leader, from darkness to light, from fear to faith. The path had been arduous, filled with mistakes and misjudgments, but it had led to clarity, purpose, and a peace I had never known. And in that moment, I made a commitment to carry this peace outward, to let it guide every decision, every word, every action. I understood that leadership is not a title, it is a responsibility. It is the responsibility to bear witness, to demonstrate transformation, and to inspire hope. I also understood that this peace, once discovered, is contagious. It can spread through example, through action, and through living truthfully. It is not something to hoard, but something to give, to share, to embody in every interaction, every policy, every effort to serve the people entrusted to one's care. For the first time, I felt free to lead, not from fear, not from survival, not from authority alone, but from purpose, from conscience, and from faith. This peace would become my compass, my guide, and my strength as I faced the challenges ahead, both as a man and as a leader. I was no longer merely a product of circumstance. I was a witness to transformation. I was a man called to act, to guide, and to testify to the power of redemption. And in that understanding, I felt a profound, abiding calm, the first I had ever truly known. I want to speak now to those who hold power but have lost their way, to leaders who command armies, manage nations, or guide communities, yet forget the weight of conscience, the value of truth, and the calling of faith. I have been there. I have walked that path. I know the loneliness, the fear, and the temptation to measure success only by control or survival. History teaches us that power alone cannot save. Nelson Mandela was once a prisoner, confined by walls and circumstance, yet he emerged to lead a nation toward reconciliation. Augustine of Hippo was steeped in sin, yet he became a saint and a moral guide for generations. These examples remind us that authority is meaningless without transformation, and that true leadership requires moral courage as much as strategic skill. I speak from experience. I have been a soldier who valued orders over ethics, a commander who reduced lives to numbers, a man whose choices inflicted pain on others. I know what it is to wield power without understanding, to believe that strength alone can shield against chaos. I know the hollowness of authority without conscience. And yet, I also know the possibility of change. If I, who have walked through darkness, who have harmed the faithful, who have lost myself in fear and ambition, can be transformed, then so can any leader. Redemption is not reserved for the powerless, nor for the innocent. It is available to all who choose to confront themselves, acknowledge their failures, and embrace truth. I urge those who lead, yet feel disconnected from purpose, to remember this. Power does not save you. Influence does not redeem you. Only truth and God can guide a leader from darkness to light. The responsibility is immense, but the opportunity is greater. You can choose to act with integrity, to serve with conscience, and to inspire hope through your example. I speak not to condemn, but to awaken. Leadership without reflection is dangerous. Authority without conscience is destructive. But a leader who embraces faith, accountability, and moral courage can change not only the course of their life, but the lives of countless others. I know this because it has happened in my own life. I know this because I have felt the power of transformation firsthand. To those who are lost, I say, look within. Acknowledge the darkness you carry. Confront the choices that have harmed others. Seek guidance beyond strategy and calculation. And allow grace, mercy, and faith to shape your path forward. It is never too late to change. It is never too late to lead with integrity. It is never too late to bear witness to transformation. If a man like me can emerge from the shadows of his past, if I can carry the weight of mistakes and still act with purpose and conscience, then any leader can do the same. The opportunity to change, to guide, to inspire, and to serve with authenticity exists for all who are willing to embrace it. I remind all leaders that history will remember not only your victories and achievements, but your failures, your courage to confront them, and your willingness to be guided by truth and faith. Leadership is a sacred responsibility. It is a test of conscience as much as capability. And it is a path that demands honesty, reflection, and the courage to act rightly, even when it is difficult. The world needs leaders who are not only powerful but principled. Africa, my continent, needs leaders who carry the light of faith and the weight of conscience in every decision. Young people are watching. Communities are waiting. Nations are counting on those who hold authority to lead with courage, integrity, and purpose. And I say this not only as a leader, but as a man who has walked the path of lostness and found guidance. I speak from the perspective of someone who has been forgiven, who has been shown mercy, and who now bears the responsibility to demonstrate that transformation is possible. If I can change, so can others. If I can embrace faith and conscience, so can those who wield power elsewhere. To every leader who feels adrift, who struggles with the weight of mistakes, who fears that redemption is impossible, I say, it is not impossible. Confront yourself, face the past, seek truth, follow the guidance of God, and let your transformation guide others. This is the path of true leadership, the path that honors both the responsibility of power and the calling of conscience. This story, my story, is not about me alone. It is about the power of grace to transform even the darkest human hearts. It is about the possibility for leaders to rise above their failures, to act with courage, and to inspire hope. It is about the enduring truth that no one is beyond change, and that faith, conscience, and courage can shape not only a life, but the world. I urge all who listen to remember this. Leadership is a sacred opportunity. It is not defined by titles or wealth. It is defined by the choices you make, the integrity you uphold, and the courage to act in alignment with truth. Even those who have fallen can rise, and even those who have harmed can become witnesses to transformation. The message is simple, yet profound. Change is possible. Redemption is real. Faith is powerful. Conscience is vital. And the lives of those you touch will reflect the choices you make today. If a man like me can be transformed, then any leader, anywhere, can choose the path of integrity, purpose, and grace. As the night settled over Ouagadougou, I reflected on everything that had happened, the confessions, the revelations, the conversations that had reshaped my understanding of life, faith, and leadership. I had faced my past, laid bare the darkest moments of my life, and been shown that transformation is possible even for those who have wandered far from the path. I think of Africa, my homeland, and the countless nations around the world where people struggle under the weight of fear, injustice, and despair. They look for leaders not just to command, but to guide. They seek examples of courage, integrity, and faith in a world that often seems dominated by power and survival alone. I have come to realize that the example I set matters not only for my people, but for generations to come. The truth I have learned is simple yet profound. Transformation is real. Grace is real. Faith can guide even the most lost, and no life is beyond redemption. The story I have shared is not about my glory or my achievements. It is about the power of change to reshape not only an individual, but a nation, a continent, and perhaps even the world. I urge everyone, from those in positions of influence to ordinary citizens, to embrace this truth. No one is too far gone. No past is too dark. And no mistake is too great to be forgiven. There is always a path forward if one chooses it. There is always a chance to act with conscience, with courage, and with faith. The moment we take responsibility for our actions and allow truth to guide us, we can begin to heal ourselves and the world around us. I think of the young people of Africa, who carry hope and energy in abundance yet often struggle to see their future clearly. They deserve leaders who embody integrity and faith, leaders who do not shy away from acknowledging mistakes, leaders who understand that true strength is measured by conscience, not control. If I, a man forged in war and shadow, can embrace transformation, then they too can rise with courage and purpose. I also think of the world beyond Africa. Everywhere, there are communities seeking examples of authenticity, mercy, and redemption. The message is universal. Change is possible. Redemption is real. Faith and conscience are guides through even the darkest moments. And every life, no matter how troubled, has the potential to inspire others by living that truth. As I reflect on my journey from lost soldier to transformed leader, I am filled with hope. Hope for Africa, where the young will find guidance, where communities will heal, and where leaders will embrace conscience and faith. Hope for the world, where redemption and transformation are possible for anyone willing to confront their past and embrace truth. And hope for myself, that I will continue to lead with integrity, humility, and purpose, bearing witness to the grace that has carried me this far. This is my call to all who hear these words: turn away from what is wrong, embrace what is good, and allow faith, conscience, and courage to guide your steps. There is power in truth, strength in integrity, and life in transformation. Do not underestimate the impact one person can have when they choose the path of light, when they act with purpose, and when they live as a witness to grace. I want everyone to know, without hesitation or doubt, that what I share here is the truth I have lived and the path I continue to follow. I have made mistakes, faced darkness, and wrestled with the consequences of my actions. And yet, through confession, repentance, and faith, I have been given a new purpose, a new clarity, and a new mission. So hear this and remember it. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. The words I share are not stories to entertain, nor tales to glorify myself. They are the truth of a life transformed, the testimony of grace, and the call to action for all who have strayed or doubted. I repeat it now, so that there is no ambiguity. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. The things I speak are the truth. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. The things I speak are the truth. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. The things I speak are the truth. Let this be a reminder that no one is beyond change, no one is beyond grace, no one is beyond hope. And in embracing these truths, we can shape not only our lives but the world for generations to come. If you have heard this story and it resonates with you, I invite you to carry it forward, share it, reflect on it. Let it inspire action, compassion, and integrity in your own life. And if you wish to continue exploring stories of transformation, hope, and faith, I encourage you to engage further, to subscribe, to comment, and to share this message so that others too may find courage, clarity, and purpose. The path of transformation is not easy. It is not immediate. It requires courage, humility, and faith, but it is real and it is available to all. Every choice you make can affirm goodness, every action can inspire others, and every life can be a testament to change. I hope for a world filled with leaders guided by conscience, communities uplifted by hope, and people who embrace truth as their compass. I hope for Africa, my homeland, to rise with integrity, strength, and faith. And I hope for each of us in our personal lives to turn away from what is wrong and choose the path of light. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and these are the truths I live by. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and these are the truths I live by. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and these are the truths I live by.